And here we go. In case you don't remember, this is a writing course. It's a second level writing course. It will fulfill the university requirement for you on your second level, successfully completed, which I'm sure you will. I've tried to throw a real mix of writing assignments at you. There's only a couple papers, there's discussion boards, there's much briefer assignments, you know, up to maybe 2 paragraphs. So there's a lot of assignments though, and I admit that, but different. Historically, this course had been taught when I first started teaching it way back in 2001, fall 2001's first course I've ever taught was this course, fall 2001. I was scared to death, right? The requirement back then was to produce 6 2-page papers. Since then, the requirement has shifted, morphed, changed. So now, especially this summer, I have a lot of flexibility in how I present it. So I've tried to mix it up for you guys. Notice with a junior executive, we're talking about writing a memo to the boss. We're talking about a thought paper. So we're talking about a lot of different kind of approaches to writing. This is kind of an overview based on what I believe writing to be or how important it is. So let's just talk some writing tips here. Right or wrong, whether you like it or not, and there's a lot of things that happen in the world that obviously we don't like, right? Others form impressions on us based on our writing. They can form impressions about our education level based on how we write, right? The level of effort we put in. It's pretty easy for us instructors to look at a piece of work and determine how much effort was put into it. If there's a lot of glaring errors, sentence structure problems, word omissions, heinous misspellings, etc., we look and the first impression, and we'll talk about this in person perception on down the road, right? The first impression we make is, wow, this person didn't seem to put a lot of effort into this necessarily, which would be a fundamental attribution error. More on that later as well. Maybe the person was under a huge amount of stress. What do you think, Annika? So, our effort. Our ability to communicate, or lack thereof. And one thing that we're doing in this class is we should be able to, when you leave this class, you should have enhanced your ability to communicate, right? So I'm going to talk about a more conscious style of writing, and that's basically, you know, what we're talking about here. A lot of people, how many of you have ever sat down, said, oh shit, I got to write this assignment. You just write it, you sit down, you write it in one shot, boom, then you save it, you hit the submit, you know, on Carmen, and you're done with it. Well, that's one way to get writing done. No two ways about it. We've all done it. But I'm going to ask you to try and develop a more conscious style of writing. And skilled writers think about the writing. I don't know if you want to call it meta writing or metacognition about writing, but thinking about writing, right? And people write books about writing, so that's strictly meta writing, if you will. Skilled writers think about writing. And you know, they might sit down before they start and draw a brief outline. And it's like, what are my central points? And I'm not talking an outline with Roman numeral, you know, 11D2 and letter A and subletter A and all that fancy stuff that you might have learned or not. It might be just a simple list of bullet points. Boy, I got to include this, I got to include this, I got to include this. Like a checklist, so you can check it against your finished assignment and say, did I cover all the points? How many of you like rubrics like that? Well, I'm probably not going to supply many rubrics like that to you. What I expect for you is to determine what your central points are, draw your own darn list, and use your own checklist. That is because you're going to develop a more conscious style of writing. Who's my audience is always a consideration. And for the most part, either I'm going to tell you who your audience is, or you got to assume that it's me and our course assistant, right? How should I set this up? What approach should I take? So take a big picture. Does this need to be formal? Can it be informal? What does it need to look like, right? Is there another way to write what I've just written? And this is a very conscious. So you finish a sentence and you go, wow, I don't know. Could I do that better? I'm a big fan of Twitter. All right, I use Twitter quite a bit. You can find me. I'm Dr._Mark, right? And often I'll write a tweet, and before I hit send, right, or submit, or whatever the hell it says, tweet, I look at it and say, is this what I want to say? Is this how I've written? Can this be misconstrued? Can this come back and bite me in the ass? Am I going to lose my job because of something I said? Right? Is there another way to write what I've just written? So that doubt, right? That skepticism that I guess is kind of engendered in us as scientists. Have I covered everything I need to cover? Am I complete? Or am I missing something? And again, that goes back to kind of your checklist. Remember, ultimately, the reader is your customer, and I want to share something that psychologist Daryl Bem said. If the reader says it isn't clear, guess what? By definition, it isn't clear, because the reader is the arbiter of clarity, not the writer. So if someone said this isn't clear, and I remember when I was younger and I was sitting in your seat as a student, I would sometimes argue with a professor. They would say, it isn't clear, and I would say, yes, it is. And then I would try to explain, and ultimately you have to understand, it's like, wow, if they're saying it isn't clear, then it must not be clear, or they wouldn't have said it isn't clear. I mean, by definition. So, all in all, you need to write good. And that includes the overall appearance, right? So I want you to pay attention to your spelling, and spelling matters, and we're going to be looking at spelling, both the course assistant and I. There's no reason to have misspellings, right? We're going to look at grammar, and we're going to be tough on grammar, so you better be grammatically correct. And I don't teach grammar because the expectation is that you know grammar at this point, and there's a lot of resources to help you with grammar, Word, Grammarly, etc. So avail yourself of those mechanisms if you so choose. What, sweetie? Punctuation and the proper use of it. Okay? Know the difference between a colon and a semicolon, and if you don't, get up on that. Right? Vocabulary. Is it appropriate to the task at hand? Sometimes highfalutin vocabulary is cool, other times not so much. And please don't use big words for the sake of using big words, like, oh, look at me, because I use big words, right? Sometimes they're not appropriate, or they're not the best choices. Writing it in a level of formality that's comfortable for you and appropriate to the audience. Neatness counts, right? Now, this is less so, you know, because I'm old school, so we turned in papers, right? So I don't want to see any footprints or blood or spaghetti or whatever else on the paper. We don't have that issue as much anymore, right? Careful editing. Does it appear to have been edited, or are there glaring, easy to spot mistakes that were just let go? And the risk of being cute or clever. I love cute, I love clever, I love sarcasm. Sometimes it's appropriate, but sometimes it's not, right? So if you want to be cute or clever, the most important part of your task is to be clear and complete. And if you're not being clear and complete, then clever should have been taken a second place, right? So if you can interject some entertainment, good, but not at the risk of missing out on any of the above that are necessary. Right, Annika? So, break a piece of writing into components. There's an old saying, how to eat an elephant. Not that we should eat elephants, and I'm not recommending that, but if you had to, how should you do it? Well, the joke states you should do it a bite at a time, because if you look at an elephant, you say, I'll never finish that. But if you think in terms, well, I could at least take one bite, then you're well on your way. And with writing, I think that's an important way to look at it. Break it into its components. Sometimes it's easier to visualize performing the task well when it's broken down to its pieces, and the following slides are one way to break down the task of writing. So, am I using the right word? Choose words carefully based on their meaning, and become a wordsmith. Understand the difference between words, right? If you have to take the GRE or some such test, it will go a long way in helping you in that regard if you want to go to graduate school. Big words aren't necessarily better. Avoid slang, but if you want to use slang in this class, that's okay if it's appropriate to the assignment, but put in quotation marks so you know and I know we're both on the same page that you were using slang and you're using it intentionally. If you're going to use ain't, that's fine. I'm down with ain't, but it better be offset by quotes so that I understand you're using it in that context and not using it because you don't know any better. Okay? So, use correct terms pertinent to the context. In this class, I'm looking for terms. Course assistant is looking for terms that were presented in context. So if I'm asking you to talk about cognitive dissonance, don't call it something else. Call it frickin' cognitive dissonance. Okay? If it's an independent variable, it needs to be called as such. All right. Now, the word. The word. Now let's go to the sentence. Let's get a little bigger about this. Real estate agents will tell you, what's the most important thing about real estate? The #1 quality real estate, and they say location, location, location. I'm going to say, what's the most important aspect of the sentence? That's structure, structure, structure. And one great way to test structure, what do you think it is? It's reading aloud to yourself. It'll help you hear if there are structural problems. If you've written a sentence, especially a compound sentence, it's getting a little lengthy, but it's necessary, right? That couldn't be broken down into multiple sentences. Read it aloud. If you stumble, if you can't say it, guess what? There's a structural issue. I know, it sounds silly. I'm going to sit here in my room and read this stuff aloud. What if someone walks in? Take the chance. What the hell, right? Okay. So, length. Now, I think one thing that makes it easier on the reader, if the reader's your customer, is to vary sentence length, right? So we need flow and we need variety. So well-structured sentence, and if you got to put complex ideas out there, right? Maybe 2 complex ideas with 2 very lengthy sentences, then give your reader a frickin' break and give them a short sentence so they can kind of catch up, right, as they're reading. So think about your reader, and that's why I'm saying a more conscious style of writing. Okay? Single thought or idea per sentence. Okay? 2 thoughts better expressed by 2 separate sentences. You might find an exception or 2, but generally that's the way it is. And what are we tying sentences together to create? What comes bigger than sentence? You're right, the paragraph. 1 topic per paragraph. All right? Okay. Importance of the first sentence is the introduction of the paragraph. Then it sets the tone. It allows the reader to kind of understand what they should expect to be reading in this paragraph. And the importance of the last sentence is also like a mini conclusion. So you can almost look at a paragraph, a well-constructed paragraph, as often similar to a well-constructed paper. Intro, body, conclusion. A paragraph, a well-constructed paragraph, has kind of an introductory sentence, the body, the explanation, and then kind of a conclusion sentence. And if you're really tricky, and when you become a super skilled writer, then you become very adept at creating transitions. So the flow from paragraph 1 to paragraph 2 is guided by the last sentence in paragraph 1, which naturally flows into paragraph 2. Now I'm talking super heavy-duty writing skill here. I'm talking some high-level skill, right? What about your title? Well, the potential reader who will be your boss when you're constructing memos, etc., quite often, right, can be super busy. And they don't, you know, when it's your, if it's your boss, they don't have to read your shit if they don't want. They can just shit can it. They can toss it aside, right? So to get your stuff read, what you need is a title that really communicates clearly what it's about. It should be clear, concise, and without a doubt, and it should never surprise. You don't want to give a title to something that has nothing to do with the title, because then people feel betrayed or they feel tricked, and most of us don't like that, huh? So, your bosses are busy. Give them a title that leads them in. A complete title can motivate them to read what you've written rather than push it aside. You'll be in competition with other people in your workplace. An inaccurate title can anger the reader. Huh? And then the paper. Now, you don't have a lot of papers in this class, so what I'm expecting to see here is in the introduction. Introduction, I was the editor of my school newspaper in high school, and, well, actually in junior high as well. This is what we learned in journalism. The first paragraph of a news story should say why, how, who, what, when, where, to the extent that it's applicable and possible. I would expect that to be in the introduction to the paper, basically. What is this paper about? How am I going to tell you the story? And what is this story going to be? What the reader should expect should be kind of spelled out. Why the reader should bother at all should be sold at that point in time. The body, we're going to look at the next slide here. The conclusion, the old saying. So tell them what you told them. You want to craft a good presentation, write a good paper, the introduction. Tell them what you're going to tell them. The body, tell them. The conclusion, tell them what you told them. 3-point plan, right? The implications might be an add-on to the conclusion. So what does it all mean? If it's appropriate and if it's necessary. And the body of our paper, we got short papers. I think the longest paper I want you to write is a 2-page paper. So you might have 2 or 3 paragraphs as the body, but I think typically it's going to be 1 or 2 body paragraphs at most, right? But it makes the story real. It is what sells your assertions, right? So what do we know? You're writing. in this class should be clear, tight, and economical. Say it with the fewest words accurately as possible. Express ideas that relate only to your theme. Cut all the rest of the stuff out. Demonstrate your ability to apply the topic in the paper. That's why we're writing the paper. Interest your reader. So you write your paper well, understand the assignment. Remember, we have Zoom sessions every week to help with this. You can email me as well. Please ask if you're unclear. I prefer to answer these questions in Zoom because other people get to benefit from your questions, right? Use an outline, as informal as it is. It can be very simple. You want to write it on a cocktail napkin, except I don't recommend going out right now. I'm totally about staying at home during COVID because we have no idea what COVID is and how it operates. Don't be afraid to rewrite. Start early so you have time to edit. Read out loud. If there's problems, you're going to hear them, like I said, right? Share it with a friend and get feedback. I don't care. If you want help with your paper, you want to contact the Writing Center, you want to contact a friend and say, hey, what do you think about this? Will you read it? Is this clear? I'm okay with that. That's not academic misconduct. Now, putting someone else's work out as your own is academic misconduct. Lifting shit off the internet, academic misconduct. But getting people to help you is not academic misconduct. Okay? So, a couple useful techniques. Repetition. I got no problem with repetition. It's often very comforting to the reader and it's very familiar. Now I know in a lot of high school English classes we've probably heard, no, repetition's bad, it's boring. Not necessarily, right? Use the same word. If you're writing about self-esteem, then call it self-esteem again, and call it self-esteem for the third and sixth time, right? Don't make up a new word because you want to mix it up. All you're going to do then is confuse me as the reader. I thought we were talking about self-esteem. Now you're talking about this other thing. Self-esteem is self-esteem, right? It might contradict what you've learned in English courses. That's all right. No. You can go ahead and look at this. This is applicable maybe for longer level courses. You're not going to have a lot of time to revisit your writing in this class. So I think you're going to have to outline, you're going to have to write, and then you're going to have to edit and be done with it. Let's face it, we're on a weekly cycle of assignments. You've got, what, maybe 6 assignments a week. It's killer. I'll tell you that right now. I don't know why you signed. No, I'm kidding. But it's gonna be tough. So you guys are gonna have to sweat it. You're gonna have to work hard, right? In my personal experience, I used to think I was a good writer. In high school, people were, oh, you're such a good writer, blah, blah, blah. And then I got to graduate school. Oh, shit. Boy, did I find out I was wrong. You know, the first paper that I turned into Phil Tetlock, I gave him about 8 pages. He wanted me to research something, he said, and he handed me back this paper, and the prevailing comments were vague and vacuous. Just like sticking a knife in my heart. Boy, did it give me some perspective. But all is not lost, because then my second advisor, Marilyn, when it was time to write my dissertation, it was a 150-page dissertation, 4 chapters. Each chapter was revised and rewritten 4 times with the help of Marilyn, right? And then it was put together for a final rewrite, all 4 chapters together to check for cohesiveness. No matter how good a writer I thought I was, revisions almost always inevitably improved the quality of my writing, and I learned so much, right? So, this is what we're about. In life, I don't care whether it's your relationship with your children, with your parents, with your partner, whether it's the processes you operate at work or it's your academics. Continuous improvement is the bomb. Ask Dr. Deming. Continuous improvement is where it's at, right? It's the absolute best competition you can participate in, is the competition with yourself to continuously improve what you do and how you do it. So, continuous improvement, and I hope that we sell that in this course. We be done with this one. On to the next one.